Get in here. It looks like it'll be a good day to check your stocks because they're up. Yay. Yay. Let me get your comments working here, and then we got a show to do. Boom, 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 boom. Do, 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 do. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the highlight of human civilization. It's called Coffee with Scott Adams, and you've never had a better time. But if you'd like to take this experience up to levels that nobody can even understand with their tiny, shiny human brains, all you need for that is a cup or mug or a glass of tank or Chelsea stein, a canteen jug or flask, a vessel of any kind. Fill it with your favorite liquid. I like coffee. And join me now for the unparalleled pleasure, the dopamine hit of the day, the thing that makes everything better. It's called the simultaneous sip, and it's going to happen right now. Go. So good. I might have to do that again later. It was that good. Well, let's check in with science, see what science can tell us. According to the Pennington Biomedical Research Center, the average rate of obesity among Americans has risen by approximately 30% over 20 years. Now, how many of you have not noticed? Have you noticed that the rate of obesity is sort of through the roof? There's good news and there's bad news. The good news is that it's never been easier to be in the top 10% of attractive people. You know, it used to be when I was a kid, if you were born attractive, well, you had all the advantages. But given that, in theory, everybody can lose weight and everybody can, fix their teeth if they have enough money, and everybody can get a good haircut and maybe do something about your skin and wear better clothes. It has never been easier to be in the top 10%. And if you're in the top 10% of attractive people, things will probably go pretty well for you. So it's good news and bad news. Well, apparently the Wall Street Journal had a big old fake news story. They were saying that Tesla was looking for a new CEO to replace Musk, but they failed to run Tesla's denial. So I guess they asked Tesla, and Tesla said, absolutely not. That is not happening. Nobody's looking for a new CEO. We already have a CEO. It's Musk. And they didn't run the denial. It's one thing to be wrong, but being wrong when the only really reliable source of information tells you that you're absolutely 100% wrong, that's pretty bad. And Elon Musk wasn't too happy about that. I guess you wouldn't be too happy either if the news ran such a fake report about you. Here's some news about Tim Walz, who I call the pointy-eared boss. If I ever do a Dilbert movie and I'm looking for live actors to play the Dilbert characters, the pointy-eared boss would have to be Tim Walz. Just imagine him and then imagine the pointy-eared boss. It's the same guy, isn't it? There's no difference. He's just the pointy-eared boss. So his latest Tim Walzism is he was explaining to an audience why he was selected as the VP candidate. And he said, quote, I could code talk to the white guys watching football, fixing their truck. I was the permission structure to say, look, you can do this and vote for this. That is the least male thing anybody ever said. I could code talk to white guys. Even the way he says it, he doesn't even say it like he is one of the guys. He says it like he's a robot who would learn the lingo of men, It's like, oh, I can code talk just like a guy. I'm not a guy. I'm not a real man, but I can talk like one. So I was a good choice. And I was the permission structure to say, the permission structure. Who talks like that? But the funny thing about that is that that even today, they still think that identity politics is the way to go. Because even though he was trying to act like a white guy, because they thought they needed to get more support from white guys, that's still just identity politics. It's just a weird one. So they just can't get out of that little trap they've set for themselves that everything is identity politics. Anyway, they'll never escape that. According to Mark Zuckerberg, um, Meta is going to try to make you an AI friend. So I guess if you have Meta, you'll be able to use their AI to create some friends. So finally, my audience can have some friends. It's not just me. That's putting a lot of burden on me. I am your invisible friend who's not that invisible. But Zuckerberg said that the average American has 3 friends, but has a demand for 15. Does that sound right? How many of you have 3 friends who are local? Because if your friends are not local, they're still friends, but it kind of doesn't count if you can't see them in person. How many of you have 3? 3 is a lot for a man. How many men need 15 friends? That's a lot. Maybe that's what women need. Women might need 15. All right, a lot of you have three friends. Good. But it looks like you'll get some extra ones. Yesterday, I talked about a video I saw from Anduril. That's the new defense contractor that does the newest high-tech defense stuff. And they had a man portable, they call it, meaning one person could carry it, device called a drone. Well, it's a drone killer called the Pulsar-L. And they showed a video where one of the people demonstrating the Pulsar-L was aiming it at a big swarm of drones coming over the hill, and it knocked down all the drones. And apparently, I was one of many people who said that can't be real. Like, it just looks too good. It must be CGI. And Palmer Luckey had to tell the public, no, we have a rule against using CGI if it's anything that can be seen. So they would use CGI to, maybe show an electric pulse or something, which they didn't do. But they would never use CGI to show something in the physical world that wasn't real. So it was real. So it works so well, apparently, that it looked fake. Now, if one soldier can carry this gun-shaped object that can take out an entire swarm of drones coming over the hill, how many of those would you have to give to Ukraine before the Russian military was completely neutered? Because it's a drone war at this point, right? It's sort of turned into trench warfare, but the humans are not leaving the trenches, just the drones. So, in theory, you could calculate how many of them would completely neuter the Russian drone attacks, at least the local ones that were on the front line. So I don't know. Maybe there's something coming that we don't know about. At the same time, speaking of drones, according to Defense Scoop, the cartels on our southern border, the Mexican cartels, are using their own drones to surveil our military that's on the border now. And now our military is looking for counter drone capabilities. Now, wouldn't that be the Enderil device? I don't know how many options they have, but it does seem like if they can see the drones and they know where the drones are coming from and they know they're cartel drones, don't they just have to aim that Enderil device at it and knock it down? It feels like we have the technology to do that. Well, Kamala Harris gave her first big speech since she's been, out of the public eye for a little while. And I got to say, she looked drunk to me. How many of you saw the clips? And how many of you thought she looked drunk or acted drunk? She looked pretty drunk. When I see her, I don't even think Kamala anymore. I think Drunkala. So, of course, she said that there's chaos and blah, blah, blah. I thought Carolyn Levitt said that the Republicans are really happy if she does more speaking. She is so bad, so bad. She's the only politician at that level that can't give a decent speech. Oh my God. And I assume some of that is because of alcohol, but it is unconfirmed. Well, allegedly, according to CNN, um, President Bukele of El Salvador has rejected the Trump administration's request to return that Maryland dad, Kilmar Abrego Garcia. Does that sound true to you? Do you think that the Trump administration asked for him to be returned and Bukele said no? Because I saw separately, there was a report that Bukele wasn't comfortable putting people who had not been convicted of a crime in his jails. So he was sort of just doing it because Trump wanted it. But do you think that this is organic? Or do you think that the Trump administration said, hey, I've got an idea. Why don't we pretend that we asked for it? We'll pretend that we tried really hard if you just say no. And then everybody wins. Because the court, apparently the court order is just that the Trump administration attempts to facilitate the return. It doesn't say they have to get him returned if it's impossible. So it kind of looks like the fix might be in a little bit. It's like, hey, we're going to ask you publicly to return this guy. Just say no. Just say no. So we'll see what this does to the news coverage. Because I don't believe anything in the news. I feel like nearly 100% of the news is not exactly what you think. There's always something a little bit missing, or there's a hidden story, or there's a B story that we don't know about. Anyway, apparently NVIDIA announced $500 billion of investments it's going to do in the United States to make its NVIDIA technology. I assume that's over 10 years or something, I assume. But he's very gung-ho on President Trump and the United States, and he should be. That's Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA. So he announced that with Trump. And I believe that Trump is saying that there's $8 trillion of money that's moved into the U.S. Now, again, that would be over 10 years, so, it's still a lot. But $8 trillion, do you believe that? I think there's something like 5 trillion that's somewhat known and confirmed, but, you have to add the Trump or hyperbole to it. 5 becomes 8, 8 becomes 20. So we'll see how that goes. Well, remember I told you yesterday that I doubted that there would really be a Ukraine mineral deal with the United States, because it just seemed to me like we weren't really getting there. Well, was I wrong? Because there's an announcement that there is a signed mineral deal with Ukraine and the United States. So I guess there is a mineral deal. Oh, wait, did I say there's a mineral deal? Well, it's not exactly a mineral deal. If you look under the hood a little bit, it's more of a deal to maybe make a deal. Was that what you thought you were going to get? Because I was sort of thinking of it as, all right, we're going to, have this specific deal and we're going to mine this specific stuff. And, this is what we'll do. This is what you'll do. Well, it's not that. It's not that. It's more like the agreement grants the U.S., quote, privileged access to investment projects for various things like aluminum, graphite, oil, and natural gas reserves. Includes oil. Interesting. What do you think that means? Privileged access. Privileged access. It's kind of not defined, is it? Suppose privileged access is just who they ask first. What if Ukraine has some minerals that they want to exploit, whether it's oil or anything else, and they say, okay, everybody, U.S. has privileged access. So what do you guys offer us? And the U.S. says, well, thanks for asking us first because we have this privileged access. So we will offer you, 50% of all the revenue. And then some other country says, we'll offer you 75%. Do they still have to do the deal with the United States? Or do you think the agreement would say that the U.S. has to match the best deal? What if we don't? What if we don't match the best offer? We'd still have privileged access because if we did match it, we'd get the deal. But do you think they're leaving the door open for maybe they're not doing quite the deal you think it is? So I'm gonna say that it looks like a step in the right direction. So directionally, looks pretty good, and it might send the right message in terms of getting a peace deal. So it's probably good. But I'll bet you the details of this deal are not exactly what you thought they were. I think it's probably a weaker deal than you imagined would come out of it. Anyway, China, according to the Wall Street Journal, China is still trying to tell us that they can more easily withstand the tariff trade war, and they can tolerate the pain longer than the U.S. But, according to the Wall Street Journal, there are cracks that are beginning to show in the Chinese economy. There's plunging trade, and there are factories that are being idled, and there are people being laid off in China. And if there's one thing I've learned about assessing China's economy, we're never right about it. How long has it been? It's been like, 8 years since I've been telling you stories about China's economy falling off the cliff, and that basically they can't last another year because there are all these, there's a real estate collapse, and they've got a demographic collapse, and they've got this and that kind of a problem and that problem. I don't know that any of it's real. I don't think we have any real visibility into what's happening in China. So I do not believe that we really have any visibility in that at all. We'd just be guessing. So I'm not going to predict that China will fold, but I think they want to deal as much as we do. So probably something will happen. My guess is that China will be a lot of nothing happening, nothing happening, nothing happening, and then something happening quickly. So I don't think it'll be like others. Now, I did see some suggestion that we might be seeing some kind of a trade deal announced, not with China, but with some other country. Have we heard anything about that this morning? Because it might happen today. Now, if I had to guess, since trade deals really take a long time to get the details right, whatever gets announced will be sort of like that Ukraine mineral deal. It'll be more like a deal to make a deal. It'll be more like uh, something along the lines of South Korea and the U.S. have agreed on an outline of what a trade deal would look like, but it would be 6 months away from actually having it signed. It might, the handshake might be enough to drop all the trade barriers. So maybe a handshake is all you need while they work out the details. But I would expect maybe South Korea and or possibly Japan will go first. That's what I think. And then I think it might be a while before the second one. But when you get to something like the fifth announced trade deal, I think Trump's poll numbers are going to look really different, because then it's going to look like things are working. First one or two, three, maybe people are going to say they're exceptions. But if Trump gets 5, even though there are maybe 200 that you need to get, if he gets 5, let's say in a 2-week period, it's going to look like everything's going the right direction. And that would be a good time to own stock, I would think. Well, I don't know if you're following the story of the DNC, the Democrat leadership, where David Hogg is getting a lot of heat because he wants to primary some Democrats, but even his co-leader in the DNC says you can't do that if you're the DNC. If you're the DNC, you got to be in favor of Democrats. You can't be primarying any of them. So he's been getting some heat from that, but he's getting some extra heat, according to the publication Semaphore, because there's some concern that he's a white guy. Now, I remember when he got elected, and I realized that there were 2 white guys in charge of the DNC, the most identity obsessed group in the entire world. Really, the head of the top identity, basically obsessed group. And I thought, how in the world do you get 2 white guys as the leadership of the identity group? And it turns out that was a problem, because there's now a complaint being filed by Kaylin Free, a Native American attorney. And she says the DNC's Credentials Committee is going to meet to talk about whether David Hogg was justly elected or there was something wrong with their process because it didn't give them enough diversity. So the complaint is they didn't get diversity in their leadership. Now, the most predictable thing in the world is that the Democrats will eat themselves from the inside, because once you commit to the identity frame, you really can't get away from it, because everybody's got a intersectionality, or well, you might be white, but we need you to be a little bit gay or trans or something. So it's like there's never-ending source of conflict within the organization. They're pretty much doomed. Well, RFK Jr. is making some news. I think he made several pieces of news. One is, this is just a wild way to say it. So this is his actual quote. He said, "We have ended HHS as the role of the principal vector in this country for child trafficking." What? Health and Human Services, the organization he's running, he's saying was the principal vector for child trafficking in the United States? That is the most damning thing I've ever heard anybody say about anything. What? Now, I don't exactly know what that means, but it has to do with the fact the Biden administration somehow managed to lose 300,000 children that came in over the border. And I think Health and Human Services must have been part of that. And the assumption is that some large number of them, or percentage of them, were trafficked for sex and slavery. And RFK Jr. says we've ended that, and we're very aggressively going out and trying to find those lost children, the ones lost by the Biden administration. Now that is one hell of a charge. Like if there were no other news, I'm seeing somebody in the comments saying that I'm moving the goalpost, but you don't mention what the topic is or what goalpost I moved. you must be one of those Nazi Democrats. Have you noticed the Democrats have a full Nazi strategy? Just make up a big lie and then get everybody to repeat it. It's the Nazi strategy. Here's something else RFK Jr. announced separately. That the new vaccines will have to be tested with a placebo-controlled trial. Now, if you're like me, it wasn't that long ago where you said to yourself, how can this be news? Because obviously all vaccines have been tested in a placebo-controlled trial. Duh, it wouldn't be very valid if you didn't do a placebo-controlled trial and then you unleashed it on the entire public. That couldn't possibly be happening, right? Apparently that was happening. The vaccines were not historically tested in a placebo-controlled trial, but that's going to change. So I don't know how much that will change things in terms of how long it takes. I'm looking at the criticism that's coming in from the dumb people. So somebody is criticizing me for not being an expert in deals. Well, surprise, I'm actually expert in deals. I used to be a contract negotiator for a living. And then when I became a cartoonist, I was deeply involved in contract negotiations my entire career because there were always licensing and publishing deals, etc. So I actually am an expert in deal making. And I'm also an expert in persuasion, which is part of negotiation. So sorry, I'm kind of an expert in this domain. I hate to disappoint you. You're going to have to come up with some new Nazi strategy. That one didn't work. All right, there are lots of things I talk about in which I am not an expert, such as, anti-drone technology. But no, deal making, that happens to be one of my domains. RFK Jr. also made some news, according to the National Pulse. He claims that DARPA might be mixing some kind of chemtrail agents into commercial jet fuel. What? How could you make that kind of accusation in public without somehow being able to check it if you're part of the government? If you thought that the fuel of commercial jets was intentionally tampered with to do geoengineering so that the jet exhaust was doing more than just being jet exhaust and was changing the environment somehow, and you thought that it was DARPA that was behind it, is there not kind of a simple way to confirm that? Can't you say to President Trump, can you talk to DARPA and just ask them, because you can declassify anything, just ask them if they're doping the jet fuel? I feel like this one's a little premature. Doesn't mean he's wrong. I'm not saying he's wrong. I'm saying I feel like that one should have been confirmed before it became a public accusation. So maybe he's getting a little ahead of himself, unless he's really confident that DARPA is doing that. And I'm not saying they're not. I'm not saying they're not doing it, but We need to know more about that. Well, as Breitbart and others are reporting, the GDP for America was weak in the first quarter. Of course, I think Trump is blaming Biden, and there was a bunch of distortions because people ordering things ahead of the potential tariff stuff. So we don't know if that GDP number is telling us anything really important, but maybe it is. Maybe it is. So, how many of you would be surprised if the country goes into a mild recession before it improves? Isn't that kind of baked into the process? I'd be surprised if it didn't happen. So I'd expect a little bit of a recession at the least. I mean, anything could be worse and anything could be better. But I think it was Jamie Dimon who said this, that the best case scenario is a mild recession. I think he's probably right. That's probably the best case scenario. But it is a best case scenario, because if we have a mild recession followed by a rapid return, and maybe to a higher point, once the trade deals are getting signed, I'd be happy with that. According to Frank Luntz, famous pollster, he talked to a bunch of people who voted for Trump, and he wondered if they were still backing Trump, given that they were feeling some economic pain and probably were going to feel some more. And he said that it's unprecedented that Trump voters still stand behind Trump despite the economic pain. Luntz said on CNBC, "I've never seen this before, because usually when you're hurt economically, that changes your perspective and your politics. Not with these people. They're staying firm." Now, the way he says it makes it sound like the people are stupid. Is that how you hear it? Like they don't know what's in their own best interest or something? I don't think he understands Republicans. The defining characteristic of a Republican is that they're long-term thinkers and they're willing to take some short-term pain to get there. It's probably the most defining characteristic. So here the president has given Republicans the following proposition. There's going to be some short-term disruption, and it's the only way to get to this way better situation. And then Republicans listened to him and said, all right, so we're going to have to suck it up for a while? Yes. And then they say, got it. So we'll suck it up for a while. It's the most defining characteristic, probably more than just about anything. I mean, everything from religion to starting a family to, staying out of trouble, and almost everything Republicans do are very obviously and clearly oriented toward the long term. And when you look at and systems over goals, and when you look at Democrats, it seems completely oriented towards some kind of short-term dopamine hit. Like even the story I was telling earlier about the DNC head, how is that any kind of a long-term anything if they're fighting about whether the head of the DNC is diversified enough? There's no long-term anything with that. It's just short-term dopamine pleasure. We got rid of the white guy. It is the single thing that defines, I think, Republicans from Democrats. It's the ability to, take some pain to get to a better place. That's it. So I would not have been surprised, Frank Luntz. According to the new Canadian Prime Minister, Mark Carney, he says, quote, we all recognize climate change as an existential threat, which makes me wonder, who is he talking to? I mean, he wasn't addressing America, but is that true? Is it true that everyone in Canada thinks that climate change is an existential threat? Everybody? I mean, even if it is, it's hard to get everybody on the same side about anything. But then he says he's going to punish companies who don't work to end climate change. All right, so which side of the border would you like to be on if you're a company? Would you like would you like to be on the Canada side of the border where you're going to get punished if you don't do enough to change climate change? Or would you like to be on the American side of the border where people are just going to be operating in whatever way, doesn't violate any laws, but, is making the most money? And in theory, if the Canadians are right about CO2 and climate change, it doesn't matter what the fuck they do because the United States isn't doing it. As long as they're our closest neighbor and we're ignoring all of that bullshit, it doesn't matter what they do. It's sort of like what we say about India and China, that the atmosphere doesn't know where a border is. So if India, China, and the United States are ignoring the climate change risk, do you think it makes any difference to anything if Canada goes balls to the wall and starts punishing companies? They start punishing their own companies for not doing enough to end climate change. It would be so different if the other big countries were on the same page. And then I could say, well, okay, at least everybody's on the same page. But if the biggest companies or biggest countries are not even doing anything about it, it's just the biggest waste of time I've ever seen. Anyway, good luck, Canada. So at the Trump had another cabinet meeting that he opened up to the cameras, which was kind of awesome. And Marco Rubio said that the State Department that he runs now, the old State Department had a dossier on a current Trump official that he wouldn't name as a purveyor of disinformation. And he said, we had an office in the Department of State whose job it was to censor Americans. And he was referring to the Global Engagement Center, which I think has been closed down now. But in the process of looking into all that stuff, they found a dossier of somebody who I think is a cabinet head who the Biden administration has identified as a source of disinformation. So I see some guesses that is Kennedy. Could have been Kennedy or Tulsi Gabbard. But Kennedy's a pretty good, that's a pretty good guess. But he's not going to tell us who it is. So, but just imagine that. I mean, just imagine that Biden literally had a well-funded, gigantic agency as part of a network of other censors, both domestic and international, whose job it was to remove your free speech if you said anything that wasn't part of the mainstream of opinion. It's kind of hard to believe, isn't it? Like there are things that you and I have lived through that the next generation is just going to shake their head and say, "Oh my God, I'm so glad I wasn't alive then," when they thought they had a little bit of free speech, but really they didn't, because they were being punished and surveilled and blocked and throttled down if they said the wrong thing. Unbelievable. Let's look at the Democrats' attack on Trump and the Trump administration, see how they're doing. Now, as you know, they've taken what I'll call the Hitler Nazi approach to politics. So the Democrats are doing the classic Nazi thing, where you just make up this gigantic lie, and then you get the media to report it endlessly until at least their people believe it. So let's check in on some of the insane lies that are being told as part of their Nazi strategy. So Kamala Harris called Trump's tariffs reckless, and his agenda self-serving. In other words, that the the point of it was to go get some tax breaks for billionaires. Do you think that the big beautiful bill that Trump is talking about, that's being now modified by the House, do you think that that's going to have a tax break for billionaires? How many think that that's actually going to happen? Because the Democrats have a little bit of a trap going on that they set for themselves. Because they've got James Carville saying that Trump's going to cut health care for ordinary people. Do you think Trump's going to cut health care for ordinary people? Now, I looked into it, there is some kind of a request that 880 billion is removed from the Medicaid budget. But it doesn't look possible. And first of all, that number would be over 10 years. So it would be something like 10%, somewhere in that neighborhood, 10% of the budget. Do you think there's a way to cut the Medicaid budget by 10%? No, there isn't. It turns out that healthcare has a much smaller margin than maybe you knew or I knew. A lot of the big money for healthcare comes from hospital stuff. Things that happen in hospitals. And apparently hospitals have a really thin margin. It's like 2 to 4%, according to Grok. Now, if your margins are only 2 to 4% on the part of healthcare that's the most expensive part, do you think you could cut 10% of it on any given year? There's nothing to cut. It's basically already operating at just barely break even. So no. And of course, Trump has said he's not going to touch Social Security and he's not going to touch health care for ordinary people. And then there's Swalwell. He's one of the designated liars. So if you see Jamie Raskin or Swalwell and Carville's sort of joining too, they're all part of the Nazi strategy of telling the big lie and then just repeating it endlessly until people believe it. So Swalwell saying all we wanted was cheap eggs, but not deporting kids with cancer. Now, is the kids with cancer being deported a true story? Well, it's technically true, but we're not really deporting them. The mother wanted to take them with her because she was deported. So, no, it's not exactly true the way they're telling it. But here's the interesting part. Steve Bannon believes that Trump will raise taxes on the highest earners. That would be the billionaires. What do you think? I feel like he might be right about that. I feel like Trump, in order to get all the other stuff he wants and to just shut people up, he might need to raise taxes on the highest earners. Now, I don't know what that would be if it's people make over 5 million a year or over 1 million a year. But wouldn't that just totally shut up the Democrats if the Republican bill just unambiguously raises taxes for the richest people? Or do you think that they would just act like it didn't happen and just keep saying that he doesn't mean it and he's going to really lower taxes on the rich people? It's the main thing they say. When Kamala Harris says it's self-serving, she kind of means that he's lowering his own taxes and those of his friends. What if he does the opposite? And I feel as if Bannon is well enough connected and he has a good enough track record of predicting that if he says that Trump's going to raise taxes on the highest earners, that's a real possibility. Now, maybe the Republican Congress can't do it. It's possible they just can't do it. But I do think maybe there's a good, at least a 50% chance that that's what it's going to look like, because it would completely destroy the entire Democrat approach. Everything they're doing is depending on telling people that Trump's really doing it for his own financial benefit and those of his friends. So I'm going to stop the comments from the bad people here. A lot of trolls today. A lot of trolls. All right. Here's what Trump said about his entitlements. He said there's a lot of waste, fraud, and abuse. There are a lot of illegal aliens who are getting Medicaid that shouldn't be getting it. But we were doing absolutely nothing to hurt Medicaid or Social Security. Now, that is such a clear public statement. Do you really think that he would say that directly, and then he would sign something that actually did hurt Medicaid or Social Security? I don't feel like he would. So I'm not too worried that the Democrats are going to be right. And that's why I call it the Hitler strategy that they're using, because they don't really care if it's true. They're just completely unconcerned. They only care that they can say it, and that they're at least their own people, and maybe senior citizens will believe it. Anyway, Morgan Stanley is forecasting that by 2050, there'll be a $4.7 trillion global annual humanoid robot revenue with 1 billion units cumulatively deployed. Do you think that sounds right? Or, 2050 is kind of far away. But do you think it'll be just humanoid robots all over the place and $4.7 trillion worth? Well, maybe. So I'm going to give you a prediction. I think there's a non-zero chance, and maybe it'll be in this budget bill, maybe it'll be in the future, that robots will be taxed. I think robots will be taxed. And the reason is because we tax everything that you can tax. If there's something that can be taxed, it'll get taxed. Now, if robots are the thing that are going to put people out of jobs, I think you have to tax them to help pay for the humans who got put out of jobs. So whether it's Trump who does it or some future Democrat administration, I'm pretty sure that robots are really going to be taxed more than just sales tax. I think there's going to be a robot tax, and if the robots are a big enough deal, it might actually make a difference to our GDP and our debt situation. So I'm not saying that I recommend it. I'm going to say that I predict it. I predict it. Well, Chuck Schumer clowned himself again in public. So he was doing a press conference to mock Trump's falling approval numbers. And now, do you know why Trump's approval numbers are going down? Is it because all of the people in the country did a deep dive and did their own research to find out how the economy is doing and all the details of what Trump is doing to influence it? Or do you think that they turned on TV and they listened to the talking heads that they always listen to, and the talking heads said, oh, the tariffs are causing chaos. Oh, they're not using a scalpel with Doge. And do you think that the public's opinion as represented in polls is nothing but how well the media is brainwashing people? So the thing that the Nazi strategy that Schumer is using and the Democrats are using is that they first must convince you that public opinion polls are driven by people's independent assessment of what's going on. Nothing like that's happening. Individual voters are not making any independent assessments based on their research and their knowledge of economics. Nothing like that's happening. It is literally a propaganda exercise. It's a persuasion exercise. And the Democrats have enough control over, the biggest part of the media that they can sell any chaos-related scalpel, not a chainsaw that they want. So they've been selling the chaos thing, and Trump's in it for his own benefit, for the oligarchs. And they found that some, 5 or 10% of the public is influenced enough by that they think it's true. And so then Schumer goes out and he holds a press conference to tell you that the public is souring on Trump. Nothing like that's happening in the real world. What's happening is that the media has brainwashed 10% of the public-ish to change their opinion about the optimism they might have had before. But as Schumer's talking about how Trump's numbers are lower than, I don't know, other presidents or something like that at this point, the 100 days, the random 100 days, a reporter notes that Schumer's his own approval is at 17%. So just imagine this. Schumer's doing a public event. The primary message is that Trump is doing poorly because the polls say so. And then a reporter points out that Trump is doing way better than Schumer in polls. And do you know what Schumer said when he was challenged by the fact that his own polls are way lower than Trump's? And the entire point of the public event is to say that Trump's poll numbers were low. He said, well, poll numbers come and go. So he spends the first part of his speech saying that the polls are telling the public something deeply important. And then somebody says your own poll numbers are worse than Trump. And he immediately, with no hesitation, changes to polls are bullshit. And then immediately switches back to those Trump polls look pretty bad, huh? And he's one of their best guys. Like he's one of their more talented politicians. That was pretty funny. Anyway, at the cabinet meeting that I mentioned, apparently Transportation Secretary Duffy says that the government's not going to give out any infrastructure funding from the federal government to states if the states are giving driver's license to non-citizens, illegal non-citizens. So that's new. It seems to me that that's a big enough threat that it might work. And it makes me wonder why it took them so long to come up with that, because it sounds like a good idea for what they want to get done. So do you think any of the states will cave and say, all right, we'll stop giving driver's license to illegal immigrants just to get our infrastructure money? I think it might work, because I think a lot of the infrastructure money gets stolen by leaders. And if they don't have money coming in these gigantic amounts so that the leaders can steal it, do the leaders really care that much about giving driver's licenses to illegal immigrants? Or do you think they really care about these big checks coming in that they can skim some off? So here's where corruption works in your favor. Usually it doesn't. But if you assume that the states are completely corrupt when it comes to infrastructure money coming in, which I do, I believe that they're completely corrupt, then the corruption itself might cause them to say, well, I'd rather get that big taste of that money coming in for the infrastructure project. So maybe we'll soften on the whole giving driver's license to illegal immigrants. Might actually work. I guess they're going to use the same standard for states that are using DEI, which is practically every blue state. So maybe the blue states are going to have some trouble getting their funding. Well, allegedly, according to CNN, Kash Patel and the FBI are reassigning some agents who were kneeling during the BLM riots. So this is according to CNN. So there were, you might remember the pictures. So when the FBI was sort of cornered, they kind of de-escalated things by kneeling to show that they were in favor of the protesters and in favor of the Black Lives Matter. And allegedly, according to CNN, that's not good for your career anymore. So if there's a picture of you kneeling to the crowd, you got reassigned and not promoted. So I'm not 100% sure this story is real, but I wouldn't be surprised. Meanwhile, James O'Keefe, famous for his OMG undercover videos, apparently he's made some kind of an enemy. Now he's good at publicity. So I'm going to take him at his word that there's a real risk here, because apparently he said on video he's not suicidal, and that in 7 days he's going to disappear for a while for his own safety. But in 7 days he will reappear and tell his story. But he's asking us for our prayers. So he was being a little bit dramatic for effect. But it doesn't mean it's not a real danger. You might be real seriously worried. Now, he didn't name who it was that he's worried about, but he teased a bombshell. That there's something about government corruption. He's got several tapes of it, and he's got video of officials caught breaking the law. So, he thinks that he has enough evidence that once it's released, there will be indictments. I don't know. We'll see. So keep an eye on that. We'll check in a week. Well, you might know that there was yet another judge who yet again ruled against Trump, saying that the Trump administration can't arrest any more illegal aliens unless they have a warrant for their arrest. Now, that's sort of not the way the process works for people who are here illegally. You don't really need a warrant for their arrest. You can just determine that they're not here legally and ship them back. But this judge ruled that you do need a warrant. And then it took a few days, but that judge got loomered. So Laura Loomer did the classic thing where she checked on the spouse. This works so often that I love there's a word for it, being loomered. It means if you're a judge or some official and you do something that looks sketchy, it means Laura Loomer is going to ask what your spouse does for a living. And you're going to find out there's something sketchy going on there with the couple. Sure enough, the husband of that judge is a multifamily real estate broker in California. And guess what market he caters to? Illegal aliens and the immigrant community. And he even makes Instagram videos about how Trump's mass deportation policies are bad for multifamily real estate brokers and investors. And of course, the judge was appointed by Biden in 2021. Now, it's almost so predictable that you don't even need Laura Loomer to do it anymore. You could just in your mind imagine it. Like, okay, there's a judge that ruled against Trump. I'm going to imagine that the judge has a spouse, and the spouse is either a gigantic donor to the DNC or somehow makes money with a charity or a business that serves the illegal immigrant community. Am I right? Yes. Yes, pretty much every time. So as long as you can shop for a judge, you can find a judge who has just the right spouse. Speaking of RFK Jr. making news, he also said, he was on a Dr. Phil show, and he said that sugar is poison. He said sugar is like crack. He said it's poison. Now, You know that I always say alcohol is poison, but when I started saying that, I didn't know that there was already a book that came out long ago before I started saying alcohol is poison that said sugar is poison. So sugar is poison, is sort of the OG something is poison. So I think he probably was familiar with that book. But when you have the U.S. Secretary of Health and Human Services say sugar is like crack, I feel like maybe something will happen. I don't know what. There's no specific policy associated with it. But I like where he's heading. So far, I'm very happy with RFK Jr. Very happy. I think he's pushing all the right buttons. Now, he's not going to be right 100% of the time, but that's not really the standard I'm going to hold him to. I'm going to hold him to the standard of, is he looking in every closet for things that might be hiding in closets? And the answer is he seems to be. He seems to be willing to open every closet door and see what the hell's in there. So as long as he's doing that, and he's being completely transparent about it, and he's sharing what he found, you can't get better than that. So asking him to be right about everything he's ever said in the past and right about everything he says in the future, that's not really a standard you could hold anybody to. But boy, if you see somebody using a system and transparency and keeping you in the loop, that's good stuff. Good stuff. Apparently, the FBI is now searching for leaks among the members of the FBI and using a polygraph test to look for the internal leakers. Now, I'm kind of surprised by that. It's a common thing in the government to use polygraphs to look for leakers, but I would feel like at least the FBI agents would know how to beat a polygraph. But probably just refusing to take it would be enough to get you fired. That's my guess. And since they don't know for sure if they can beat it, maybe it scares them into confessing or something. I don't know. But that's happening. It's pretty scary. It's scary that this tool exists and that it's in widespread implementation. What happens when the polygraph gets to the next level? Don't you think that we already have the technology that we can put a little hat on people that has sensors to their brain, and it can tell for sure if they're lying without doing the bodily changes that the polygraph does? Just directly looking at their brain and find out if they're lying? Because I think we're right there. So isn't that a scary future where your employer can know for sure if you're lying? I mean, you shouldn't be lying, but it would be a different world if somebody could know for sure if you're telling the truth. Anyway, according to Unusual Whales on X, Visa wants to give AI your credit card to buy groceries. Now, I guess Fortune is reporting on this. Now, I think what that means is that if you wanted to use AI as like an agent, like a little AI that's your assistant, where you can tell it to go buy some tickets to the show or go buy some online groceries or something, it really can't do anything unless it can use your credit card. So it's where things had to go. So it's not even so much about Visa. It's just at some point, your robot and your AI, they kind of had to have access to some part of your finances, or else they couldn't do much useful stuff. So this is probably something that's inevitable, but it's kind of scary that the AI would have access to any of your funds. But it tells me that I need a second AI. I need one AI that's an agent that can go do things like buy things on my behalf. But I need a second AI that watches the first AI just to make sure it doesn't rob me. Right? It's sort of a two AI situation. With humans, it's not unusual to have a double authorization situation where two humans have to. I think in banking you see this a lot. Um, if I recall, when I was a banker, a teller, if we needed to open the big safe, we didn't leave it open all day. But if we needed to open the big safe and anybody needed to go in, they could never do it alone. There had to be two people so that one person would watch the other one to make sure they don't rob you. AI has got to be the same thing because humans are not going to be able to watch AI too well. You're going to need one AI just to watch your other AIs and make sure they're not ripping you off. So I think that's inevitable too. Apparently, the scammers, according to Futurism, Joe Wilkins is writing about this. Scammers are using AI to disguise themselves as attractive people or just different people. And they're going after the boomers because the boomers are easy to fool. So I guess AI is so good at this point that you could have your natural face doing something like a Zoom call. And I assume that they can do it in real time, not just video, but something like a Zoom call where you look exactly like somebody else, like a completely different person. Now, I haven't seen that demonstrated yet, but I wouldn't be surprised, of course. I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't work. Wouldn't be surprised if it does work. So watch out for that. If something looks too good to be true, it probably is. I've been able to identify scams because anytime there's anybody who alleges to be female and shows interest in me, I immediately say, well, that's a scam. Yeah, I don't believe that. So use that same standard. Well, here's an update for the Houthis. PX hath reposted a Trump warning that the Houthis will be treated as an Iranian attack. So Trump wants to make sure that people know that the Houthis are not operating independently, that they're backed by Tehran. Now, I don't know if that's going to change anything because we all knew that, right? But it feels like it's firing a shot across the bow of Iran when they're trying to get a nuclear deal. Now, I told you the other day that apparently the Houthi situation was not part of the negotiations with Iran. And I thought, why? Why would that not be part of the negotiations? Like, why would you bother to get a nuclear deal if you weren't going to, also deal with the Houthi situation? You ought to throw that in there. So maybe this is part of what Trump's getting ready to do. Make sure that gets thrown in the deal, doesn't get forgotten. According to Remix, Russia's budget is getting hit hard because oil and gas prices are falling all over the world, and Russia depends on those. But I'm going to say the same thing I said about China. We only imagine that we know what's happening with the Chinese economy, but it's the same with Russia. I feel like we just sort of imagine that we know. So maybe Russia's got a budget problem, and maybe that will have something to do with them wanting to get peace in Ukraine, but I wouldn't bet on it. So I'm going to discount that as being important. If oil price went down another, 40%, then it definitely would make a difference. But at the moment, it's just going to squeeze them a little bit, and they'll figure it out. According to PJ Media, he's writing about an exclusive report in the UK Times that says that Europe, if it wanted to put peacekeeping troops on the ground in Ukraine, that they would struggle to get 25,000 troops. And the larger picture is that apparently NATO is so hollowed out and the European countries are so, let's say, so bereft of military, not just personnel, but equipment, that there's almost no military in Europe. They don't have people, and they don't have much in the way of assets or equipment. So I guess they were depending on the United States being the primary combatant if Russia decided to take Europe. Because it doesn't look like Europe could defend itself. They don't have enough people, and they don't have enough assets. So that's pretty scary. But doesn't it seem like there's now a trend that we've seen that nobody has the military that you thought they had, that everybody's bluffing? Because aren't you a little bit surprised that the entire Russian military couldn't capture all of Ukraine? So Ukraine is fighting Russia to a standstill with what, senior citizens and children and anybody they can get to go in a pit with some drones. So I don't think that Russia had anything like the military that we assumed they had. And it looks like Europe doesn't have anything like the military that we assumed they had. And I wouldn't be surprised if China also doesn't have anything like the military we thought they had. Although if they were going bold as the wall instead of, just trying to stay within the lines, probably it would be different. If they used their best weapons and stuff, probably it'd be different. But I don't know. It's so easy to assume that some other military is stronger than it is. In other news, according to ZME Science, China made the world's fastest transistor and didn't use any silicon. It runs 40% faster and uses less power, and blah, blah, blah. But I'm going to say the same thing that I should have said about battery breakthroughs, because every single day I see a new report about somebody made a battery breakthrough that charges faster and lasts longer and doesn't require any rare earth minerals. If you would look at the history of breakthroughs, it could take 5 to 10 years for anything to hit the market, and it could also take decades. That wouldn't even be unusual. So this new kind of chip and the new kind of batteries, they probably will change the world, but maybe not for 15, 20 years. So it's more like a forecast of what the future looks like. In other news, my last story here, I think it's my last one. Yeah. The University of Bristol has found that some conditions like depression and schizophrenia might have something to do with underlying conditions in the body. In other words, that it might not be an entirely brain related. It might be something about your overall physical fitness that's causing your depression and schizophrenia and other mental health problems. And I will just remind you that I've been saying for years that one of our big mistakes in healthcare, at least mental health care, is to assume that your brain is the thing that's in your skull. That might be the most important part, but you should think of your brain as your entire body, because anything that happens to your body is going to affect your brain so much, whether it's gut health or probiotics or this new thing is about immune response. So they think if they give you a better immune response, you'd have better mental health. Now, I don't know about this particular study, but just in general, the fact that we treat the brain like it's a special thing in your skull and not really just, one component of your mental health has always been a mistake, in my view. Could be the food, could be. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's what I had for you. I'm going to say hi to the locals people very quickly. And the rest of you, I'll see you same time tomorrow. Thanks for joining. All right, locals, I'm coming at you in 30 seconds, or possibly not. So The answer is not, because the button to go private is not working today. So I'll have to close the studio to close that, which means I can't go private. But I'll see you tomorrow on the pre-show, and we'll have some fun then.